welcome, Josiah. Thanks for being on the show. Could you just introduce yourself for our listeners?
Yeah, it's cool to be here. I don't really know what I would. I don't have so much to introduce, but I'm 18. I'll be 19 next month.
Hmm.
Um, I was most recently going to GCU, where I was on the varsity League of Legends team there. But I've been in Chicago for the past like 8 months since January. I just came back to Arizona because I'm planning to go back to GCU at the end of this month, actually.
Hmm.
But yeah, that's pretty much the TLDR.
And what are you studying at university? I think you said psychology.
Yeah, psychology actually, but it's interesting. So I kind of want to go into like organizational psychology, and maybe like go into a HR role.
Nice.
But I don't know. I'm also considering maybe adding like a business related minor for that same reason.
Hmm.
So because I don't think I want to switch to human resources entirely, like as a degree. But uh, but yeah, psychology for now for sure.
Nice. Yeah, I spent quite a while interested in organizational psychology. I think we chatted about it back when we were playing our League of Legends team together and all of
Yeah,
that.
right.
Yeah. So yeah, we definitely have a lot of common interests. Last time we had a conversation off the record. Well, I haven't published it basically, but it was about Wu. You had just read a book about it, right? The
Yeah, that was kind of cool.
Yeah. So, for this conversation, what I want to focus on is modern masculinity and
Mhm.
just whatever you've learned, the advice you'd like to share. And we can also discuss, because you said you were going through some things, right? And you're trying to like
Oh, sure.
solve some problems right now. So, we can go over that. Because I think the useful thing for a lot of young men, and me included, is getting a realistic sense of life. So, that means facing reality as it is, which will include negative things, it'll include hard things. It's not all
Yeah,
rainbows and sunshine.
yeah.
So yeah, have you heard of Richard Reeves?
I have not.
So I recently got his book. It's called Of Boys and Men, and I saw some interviews with him online. And basically, he did a whole bunch of research. The book is quite new, September 2022. It came out.
Oh, okay. So maybe that's part of why.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm honestly already a bit interested without even knowing what it's about. I do have my Kindle with me. I usually try to keep it with me kind of for this exact reason in case like something interesting comes up that I might want to read so that I could just kind of get it and not forget about it. So,
Hmm.
what's it, uh, sort of focused on?
So yeah, what he did is a bunch of research on boys and men and figuring out like what are the problems they're experiencing in society and also what are possible solutions because we do need
Right.
solutions, right? So he actually figured out based on interviews I've heard from him, he figured out that actually now it seems like once we've taken the systematic barriers away that were on women, they're significantly outperforming men. And when you look into it, you begin to realize, like, oh, women's prefrontal cortexes develop significantly earlier than men. Some studies show 2 years earlier, some studies show up to 11 years of an advantage. So, like, when you've got a 16-year-old girl and a 16-year-old boy competing for college applications, one of them is effectively an adult in terms of their rationality and their brain's ability to make decisions and handle emotions, and one of them is still a child in a very real way. And it's actually the woman who's the adult. So that leads to because we know that early educational disparity can lead to longer large term like career and life effects. So right now it turns out women are going to be 70% of college graduates in the next 5 years and
Yep.
they're on track already to be earning more. I think they already are earning more actually. The
Sure.
statistics of like women earning less on the dollar, like 77 cents on the dollar, have now been debunked. They're not true anymore. Um, so so really, and it turns out that somehow girls growing up in single parent households have the same life outcomes as girls growing up in dual parent households. But boys growing up in single parent households have significantly worse outcomes than boys growing up in dual parent households, whether it comes to emotional health or financial success or almost anything we can measure. And I did grow up in a single parent household. My dad left the house when I was 13. My mom separated from him, and I never realized that that might have had an impact on what I was going through. So yeah, we can
Mhm.
discuss all these issues. But first, I just want to ask, like, what is your perspective? Because you're an 18-year-old male. What do you feel like you've grown up with? Do you feel like things have been good for you?
Uh, No, I mean, it's like kind of like ups and downs. I feel like the past few years, especially like probably since I was like 15, have been pretty solid.
Hmm.
Um, I think I it's just like one of those things where I definitely like have like seen people like there's like so many people and like especially where I am now, like significantly like worse situations. I think like I had a pretty solid amount growing up.
Hmm.
And I think I was also fortunate that very like early in my life, like my parents really tried to like I guess do their best to set me up. Like they were very present and you know, I think a big part of like my development was going to this school called STEM, but I had to test into that school. So like my dad tried to like prepare me for the test or whatever. I didn't really get it at the time, but I think that that all played a role for sure. And so I think I'm pretty fortunate in a lot of ways.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense to, because I've been learning a bit of Stoicism, and it seems to make sense really to be grateful for wherever you are because you can't change the past. But then also, I'm trying to take an honest look at like what are the problems so that we can make things better for the next generation, and also so that I can like take action, on my end. So yeah,
Sure,
one thing we'll cover definitely is dating and relationships because you have significantly more experience than I do, which is good. I can learn from that. That's kind of my goal.
I guess.
Yeah. Um, so, from your perspective, what do you think are some of the main challenges that young boys and young men are going through today that we could help them with, if only we knew how?
Um, yeah, it's a little broad.
Hmm.
So I think like I guess like to I guess sort of address some of the things you were bringing up earlier, just like a little bit.
Hmm.
Um, this like sort of idea that you know, like our brains sort of develop like a little bit slower and at like crucial times of like our lives, maybe we would be at like somewhat of a disadvantage.
Hmm.
I think that's maybe fair. I think I mean there's probably a lot of variance to that. I wouldn't say that like maybe I mean obviously like all like you know men's brains won't develop later than like all women's, but sure I could accept that like on a general level yeah guys could be at a disadvantage especially early in life that would make sense.
Yeah, by
But
about
I
age
think
25, it's mostly even.
yeah, yeah, but like of course by then like a lot of important stuff has already happened, so
Right.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think the maybe it's like a little bit unfortunate, but I think it's kind of important as well. It's just like we have to like understand that these things are like sure these factors may be at play and they may be influencing us and maybe like these things can be true, but also um we can't really or at least I don't think we should really look at them as like obstacles so much
Mm.
uh because you know it's I think the way that these things can become truly restrictive and like actually limiting is if we look at it with a mindset of like, dang, like, you know, we have to like do these same things and make these same like important, like life changing decisions at ages where we might be significantly more immature, like
Hmm.
biologically than like our counterparts, right?
Hmm.
And like that kind of sucks a little bit. And it's like kind of easy to like just be like, dang, like that's unfair because it is. Um, and like feel like a little sad. And I mean, honestly, even that's fine but after like a certain point, you do have to go like, okay, like as weird as it's gonna sound, this is gonna sound super weird. Um, coming like talking about men because of course this is honestly this is language that we usually would use to talk about like women's struggles.
Hmm.
Um, but like you just kind of have to like sort of accept that like okay, you might be at like somewhat of like a disadvantage, but you just have to like work that much harder to make sure you gain the same opportunity
Mm.
and I think that really the question comes down to like, are we capable? And like, sure, like maybe at 16, 17, 18, whatever, we might be a little less capable than women in some ways, like, or at least like our thought processes might be a little bit like flawed and
Hmm.
we might be a little bit more immature. But it's like at the end of the day, we are still capable of doing all of these things. So how far ahead of us like women may be at any given time shouldn't matter too much as long as we ourselves are at a point where we can achieve what we want to achieve.
Hmm.
It really doesn't matter. Ultimately it doesn't matter if we're getting you know what we need to get done and we're like achieving our goals and okay like I guess Susie is like, 20 years old mentally. I know it's not how it works, but let's just say like 20 years old mentally, and I'm like about to be 19. But like, who cares, bro? Like, we're in the same class, we're doing the same stuff, and it's like, as long as you kind of think about it that way, I think it'll be a little easier to be like um, more productive and kind of like not sort of feel sorry for yourself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I totally agree that, self pity doesn't get us anywhere. Even pity in general doesn't get us anywhere, right? So just because this might be the biological reality doesn't mean necessarily that we should turn men into victims, because they're not victims,
Exactly.
really. Or at least to call them victims is very disempowering, I would say. Just like I would not call women victims, when really what we're trying to look at is what are the choices they can make, but also what are the systematic changes we can make to make their lives better, and thus to make everybody's lives better, right? Because when women are thriving, humanity thrives. And when men are thriving, humanity thrives as well. But the problem right now is if men are suffering and women are thriving, humanity is going to suffer too. And unfortunately, women are also going to feel the negative effects of that because there will be less, there will be less men to communicate with, to date with. Basically, half of humanity is struggling, right? It wouldn't be a great situation, or at
Of
least
course.
a big
True.
portion of half of humanity. Um, so let me just think about this because it's interesting. I think one solution somebody had proposed was, what if we put boys into school 2 years later than girls, right? So that you have, say, a 12-year-old boy competing with 10-year-old girls. And that seems to be closer to, like, that seems to maybe even out the maturity issue a bit. And then I think later in life, I agree with you that there is something to be said for a good work ethic, hard work, right? But even there, it actually seems like women significantly outperform men because they generally are the ones who are turning in their homework on time. They're getting good grades. They're highly conscientious. They're more academically oriented than many men or many young boys, even. So maybe it requires a culture shift. Maybe it requires a change in how we raise our children. I'm not sure. And I'm definitely not advocating that we do anything that sets women back. I think women are doing great. That's awesome, right? And there's still plenty of progress to be made on that front. I've heard women complain that they still lack abortion rights in the US, for example. They lack a lot of freedom. So I get that, there's still work to be done there. But then for boys and men, what can we really do to help them figure out, like, okay, life, I guess, yeah, what are the unique strengths of men that they can lean into? That's a question that's been on my mind. What do you think?
Mhm. I think this is like it might be like a little bit of a weird way to phrase it because
Mm.
I wouldn't really say that men have any unique strengths that like women don't have. I mean, I don't know. Could you think of like any strength that like, you know, a man has inherently from being a man that like a woman doesn't have?
So we
Because
we have
it would
testosterone, more testosterone than women, right?
sure,
So
right.
what does testosterone lead to? We tend to have higher aggression, right? We tend to do riskier things. This is a double-edged sword because the testosterone can lead to men risking their lives for no good reason, just to show off, or because they feel like it, doing some really stupid things that get them hurt, right? There,
Yeah,
there, there are entire subreddits I've seen of like men doing stupid things.
yeah,
uh,
yeah, yeah.
but
But it's kind of fun. But like that's we only think that, or at least I only think that because like I'm a man, so I guess like that's how it goes,
it's
right?
kind of fun, yeah. And I think that also makes us well suited to take risks, to be protectors, to play the protector role,
Mhm.
to to sort of put ourselves in situations that many other people would run away from. Um, yeah.
Okay, I think I can give an answer then
Mhm.
because it's like it's definitely I was thinking of it through the lens of like it has to be something that like men only
It
have like
doesn't need to be
possess.
mutually exclusive. It's
But
more like
like
they have an
but yeah,
affinity.
yeah, for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And I think like a big one then would probably be like or like at least a really big trait that I think men will have more frequently or
Hmm.
more commonly is just resiliency
Mm.
overall. Um, I think that's like a really big one, and I think that if you're high in resiliency, then it's gonna be like a lot easier for you to find success in like throughout like I guess all the stages of life, regardless of like um your current position or like what random things might happen in the future. I think you'll be like pretty you won't be as susceptible to like random changes and stuff like that. It won't influence you as much. I think resiliency is just like a really great trait to have and to like possess strongly. And I think that um yeah, I think like guys especially definitely tend to have that. So
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because when I look at, for example, women tend to have higher emotional IQs, like
mhm,
better capability for empathy, for compassion. They even can feel their emotions more deeply often, whereas men tend to be more repressed on their emotional experience. But that's a double edged sword because for women, it can lead to higher anxiety, higher rates of neuroticism, like more grappling and difficulty with their emotions, right? Because they're so deeply steeped in it. For men, it's more common to be kind of stoic or to learn over time to handle emotions in a different way that comes with its own problems, but also comes with some advantages, which is that they can genuinely look to solve problems rather than talk about their feelings, right? They have different impulses.
mhm.
So that's interesting. Actually, this is something you'll be interested in, psychology wise. I heard a psychotherapist named Adam Lane Smith talk on Chris Williamson's podcast about this very issue. And he said that we tend to treat men as if they need female therapy. So we try to get them to talk about their feelings and to express themselves and to discuss their emotional problems. But men don't want to feel loved in that way. They just want to feel powerful and respected and capable. And he told this story of the World War II Blitz in England, where bombs were dropping on London, and there were these men who had sort of been in care facilities in catatonic states. They were basically unresponsive, basically vegetables. And nurses were just taking care of them, and they had been in this state for years in bed. And then these bombs started dropping on England, and there were fire engines and ambulances that needed to be driven and nobody to drive them. And these men started getting out of these hospitals in droves and driving these emergency vehicles and saving lives and risking their lives. And it was like this miracle story, but I think it kind of illustrates that men need a purpose. So something Chris Williamson had said then was like, give a man a purpose and a way to achieve it, and he'll crawl over broken glass with a smile on his face.
I do kind of like that quote, and I honestly kind of agree with what he's saying. But when you think about like, so here's the thing, I honestly don't mean to be overly critical.
Mm-hmm.
I find you know being critical of things for no reason to be really annoying usually, actually. But I do just have to question like not even to say that it's wrong, honestly, because I think he might be onto something with the idea of like, okay, maybe the two, like maybe men and women typically will respond better to therapy in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, first, like so I guess by female therapy, we're just referring to like a very like emotional approach. Something along those lines.
Or a
Fair enough,
dialogue
I guess.
based approach, let's say, right?
Or
Like,
even a dialogue based approach. That's a pretty like that's also a pretty broad category though. No?
sure.
So it's just like and then also I understand how the story sort of illustrates what he's saying, but it's like I would personally prefer to see like as like sucky as it's gonna sound, as like cringy as it's gonna sound, I would honestly prefer to just see like maybe a study that was done on, this at least relative topic that shows like something meaningful rather than like, okay, these guys are in a catatonic state, bombs are being dropped, and like we need people to like, okay, man, like the ambulances and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
fire trucks. That makes sense, but it's like are these people potentially waking up because of the bombs dropping around them? Like maybe something like I don't know, dude. Maybe like the shockwave is like somehow like jolting. I don't know what's going on. Or do they just like magically know somehow that dude, their manly help is needed. Only their masculine hands can drive the fire trucks and the ambulances. And so they just wake up out of their like catatonic, like coma like states, like not knowing what's going on to go. There's like no way, man. I mean, not no way, but
I get
what
what
I'm
you're saying.
saying
It
is,
doesn't make
I
logical sense.
it really doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think the part of the story that really does illustrate what he's saying better is that once these people did wake up, at the end of the day, what these men went and did was, go like risk their lives and help the effort. Okay, that I agree with. So maybe we have something there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do think that if we're gonna like present this as like an actual like approach to be taken, we have to sort of like be able to present like, okay, like men respond to treatment in these sort of ways or these sort of treatments
Mm-hmm.
better than maybe these sort of treatments, or maybe the more standard sort of ways of treating patients, right?
Hmm.
And so maybe like at least at the beginning of treating patients, right? Maybe men and women should receive slightly different treatments, and then maybe you can tune the approach depending on the individual. That that's like a conclusion we could come to, but we need to kind of do it through, okay, like we have research that shows this, and not like an anecdote from World War II.
I agree. It shouldn't be our only data point. And I think it's good for you to be skeptical and to break it down because, I mean, I think that's what any good scientist would encourage critical thinking, right? Like, let's take something apart, let's criticize it, let's try to find flaws, and let's try to make it better through that process. Let's try to come to a better conclusion, a better solution. So, one thing Adam Lane Smith also talked about, because he's helped hundreds of patients as a psychotherapist, um,
Okay.
he follows attachment theories. That's something you're familiar with?
Um, Only a bit.
Okay, because I wasn't familiar with it until I started seeing his work. But he
Makes
mentioned
sense.
that yeah, when he was working with couples and he also worked with individuals, what he found was really if you could give men a step by step like list or plan or way to overcome whatever problem they had, whatever psychological problem, emotional problem, set of habits, that would help them a lot more than if you could talk about the issues but not present an action plan.
I actually kind of agree with that. Yeah.
But for women, he found that they actually like if they could talk out the problem, they'd figure out the solution themselves over time, right? It was more that they needed to express it, they needed back and forth, they needed a sounding board. They needed someone to listen and empathize and not judge them. For men, it was almost like they actually needed a little bit of judgment. They needed some harshness. They needed someone to be that. And I think this is why Jordan Peterson has been so popular is he is that figure for young men. He's basically saying, "Look, I have high standards for you. I think you are not living up to what you could be. So here's what you can start doing. You can clean your room. You can do the." And then people say like, "Yeah, I cleaned my room and then I started working out and then I did this and that and my life got better." Or like I went to work and I started focusing on my job even though I hated it and I got a promotion and I got another promotion. And then you realize, "Oh, if I take something seriously, I will get results."
Yeah, I agree. And I actually like Jordan Peterson a lot too. I think like some people, I think like for example, like maybe I tell some of my friends that and they like might laugh at me a little bit. Like I remember I saw like the ads and it's like you're a beast or something like that, and it's like everyone just like broke out laughing. But I think like actually 80% of what he says is like really solid,
Mhm.
and I think that definitely people would be better off from listening to him rather than if they did it for sure.
Yeah, I think some of his older lectures are especially interesting because they are psychology lectures. He's literally in a
Yeah.
university hall giving psychology lectures. And it's funny how many people I talk to who dislike Jordan Peterson. And I ask them, did you know he's a clinical psychologist? Did you know he has treated patients? Did you know he gave lectures on psychology? And they're like, no. So they only know him
That's surprising.
from his political fame, basically.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's crazy because like that's like how I first came to know him. Like that's
right.
like who I knew him as.
But that's the
Okay,
difference. So most of the time, this isn't always, but this is the pattern I've noticed, is the people who believe Jordan Peterson is a grifter, a scammer, a liar, a con artist, an old man set in his ways, they generally discovered him because of his political controversy. And then the people who actually like a lot of what he's saying, they have tended to seen his lectures or have read his earlier books like Maps of Meaning or even 12 Rules for Life, and they tend to respect him as a psychologist first, and then other things, right? Or as a parent
right.
or a psychotherapist and so on. So that helps me realize, okay, the way in which someone is exposed to a person, the first impression kind of matters. And so, yeah, I don't worry too much about the political controversy or the divisiveness because it's just, to me, it's kind of a waste of time to get embroiled in that. I'm more interested in, like, what are the actionable steps he talks about? And it's amazing some of the stories he tells. Like, he talks about a young man who was in his 30s, still living in his mom's house. And this young man had a room, and Jordan Peterson was trying to help this young man sort of become independent. And so he said, "Look, why don't you vacuum your room? Let's set that as a task." And the guy actually like struggled. He brought the vacuum cleaner upstairs, and then he like left it in the doorway of his room, and he walked over it every day to get in and out. And he just like ignored the problem. And I've been through these states, so like I can appreciate what goes on when I really don't want to clean or when I'm really depressed or I'm completely demotivated. So then Jordan Peterson said, "Okay, let's make it smaller. Do you have a drawer that you can organize? One drawer. Put some socks and underwear in there. Make it a drawer for your clothes." And so the guy was able to do that. So what Jordan Peterson was trying to illustrate with that point is figure out the direction you want to go in as a person and take the smallest possible step you can take, right? Like, it doesn't matter how small it is, just take one step in that direction because then you can take a slightly bigger step and then a slightly bigger
Yeah,
step.
any amount of progress. Yeah,
And so anybody can make any level of progress with incremental growth like that. But I think
yeah.
we judge ourselves so harshly, and I don't know. There's so many people who would look at that young man and they would like, I don't know what to call it. They would almost like blame him. They would feed the voice inside his head that is calling himself inadequate. Whereas Jordan Peterson
No, for
didn't do
sure.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah, Jordan Peterson
yeah,
just said, "Let's go smaller. Let's go." There's no judgment there. So that's why he's such an interesting character to me because not only is he harsh and judgmental with young men when they need it, but he's also compassionate and forgiving when they need that. He's encouraging when they need that because that's what
yeah,
this his client needed, right? He didn't need someone to yell at him harder. He just needed someone to tell him try something a little bit smaller and
yeah,
then we'll build up. Basically someone to hold the guy's hand. But even then you can see how that's an example of therapy that is action oriented.
yeah. Actually, so I mean, that's like the thing, right? I That's honestly like a sensible application that make it seem solid. I like it a lot.
Yeah.
But it's like if we can show more of that, or like maybe do that in like a setting where we can actually have some sort of measurement of something,
Hmm.
then I think that's when we can start really making like progress on like a larger scale.
Hmm. It makes sense. Yeah. I'm hoping that that spreads. Now, to be fair, I don't know what the normal kind of therapy is. Maybe I need to just sign up for some therapy to find out. Like what? Because I did do one session with a master student. Um, she did tell me that she wanted me to talk more about my feelings, that I was using concepts and going into intellectual things too much. She wanted to hear more about my feelings. So
Mhm.
I don't know if that's a good sign or not, but yeah, past that one session, she ended up getting sick and then called it off. So it never went further than that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's interesting. I'll try to get more data points. Um, so what I want to ask you is, if there was one piece of advice that you think young boys should hear to grow up with, whether it's hard work or something else, what do you think is that message you would give?
Um, hmm, maybe honestly, um, especially right now, maybe just like a general awareness, which is pretty broad, but to elaborate just a little bit, I think that there's just like a lot to absorb right now, like a lot of information, a lot of people like constantly, giving their opinions or like that you're just going to be seeing. And I think that most people have honestly at least something that you can take. And also most people have like a lot of stuff that you probably shouldn't. And
Hmm.
so it's just being aware of like what you're absorbing and what you're becoming is probably the most important thing. And then also just like believing that you're like capable is really important too.
Hmm.
Because ultimately, like if you're capable of doing something, then it will happen. And so, as long as like you actually believe you're capable of doing whatever you're setting out to do, it's pretty much a lock anyway, almost guaranteed. But it's usually when these like sort of self doubts come in, that's when failure starts to creep up a little bit, is what I've noticed. So
Hmm. That's
yeah,
really interesting. Okay, I like that quite a bit. So you're saying number one, cultivate discernment, prioritize
yeah,
discernment, the
yeah,
ability
honestly,
to sift through information. So learn critical thinking,
exactly.
right? Like learn to take
Yes,
everything with a grain
honestly,
of salt. Yeah.
yeah, honestly, it's like it's pretty simple. It seems like common sense, like kind of information, but I think critical thinking is like, I'm sorry. I am a bad. Most likely yes. Sorry, but I think so. Everyone knows how important critical thinking is. Everyone knows everyone is a critical thinker. Everybody is a critical thinker.
Quote
But it's
unquote.
like
Yeah.
right, right, right. But I feel like really when it comes down to like I think people are really good at thinking critically about like things outside of themselves, or outside of the things that are even affecting them. And I think our perceptions change so much when we're being like sort of like introspective.
Right.
And so it's like if we can like think about like why we're doing the things, like not just like, oh, is this like behavior desirable or not, or like is this good or not, but also think about like, okay, is this like an undesirable behavior? Why am I doing it? Because just saying like, okay, like I'm not going to do this anymore is not realistic for facilitating long-term change almost ever, unless you're just crazy, like you're just like that, and it's just that simple. And for most of us, it isn't. But if you can figure out why you're doing something that you don't want to be doing, that's when you can sort of like start actually saying, okay, like now these are the changes I can make in my life. Or usually it's not even something as significant as your life. Just this is how I can change my mindset about this thing,
Hmm.
and from there, that's how actual meaningful change can happen and sustainable change at that.
Right. So really it's like, okay, focus on yourself, right? And this is a message from Stoicism as well. It's like focus on what's in your control. It's okay to have no opinion about most things. They're not in your control anyway, right? It's like you don't need an opinion on the weather. Focus on
Yeah, but
something else.
also
Yeah.
I think it is good to have opinions on most things at the same time. It's
Okay.
just that it's not the things that are in your control and the things that also are directly affecting you or are directly around you, or
Hmm.
maybe like how you're directly affecting others. Those are the most important things to focus on for sure.
Makes sense. Yeah.
I think there is like a interesting thing. um what did it say? I think it was like in a YouTube video actually, but pretty much the point of it was there's like no advantage to being good, right? And it was pretty much about like why would we even like practice these like good or like socially acceptable, like just like I guess like what's the word it's not really coming to me right now, but just being like good, like honorable people, I guess overall there's like really no advantage to that, especially like in like you know our like everyday lives now. But I think that the main advantage that comes with it is that I think if you're like a certain type of person, then of course you're going to typically like attract those other certain types of people to be around you. And I think the idea is that eventually, you know, regardless of whether you're going to like change the world or not, probably not, you can at least change your world and your environment and pretty much create what you want to be around you. So if you're like a pretty like great person, right? Then you're probably not going to be like, aligning with a bunch of scumbags, and you can be around people who kind of share your like morals and values and ideals. And then like every day for you, you'll be around people that you want to be around. But if you're a really sucky person, then like, I mean, maybe you just love being around sucky people too, but you're probably not going to be too happy. It's just, that's kind of what you're choosing. You know what I mean? So,
That's an interesting way to put it. So I've never thought about this, but yeah, it's true. Basically, cultivate the kinds of values you would want from the people around you in the long run, because that's what will happen. So if I choose to be more honest every day, I will end up with more honest friendships. And I've noticed that over the last few
yes,
years,
yes,
right?
yes.
If I choose to pursue my curiosity, I will end up with people who either like my curiosity or are curious themselves. And we'll be on a great journey together. If I suppress my
Right.
curiosity, which I spent so many years doing, especially in high school, because it was punished in high school,
Yeah, yeah,
then
yeah,
then I'll be surrounded by people who are uncurious or who don't value curiosity. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually.
yeah.
And by the way, I think actually people who live by a code, whatever code is, they set the code themselves. They do have better lives. And I think that there is value in being an honorable person, not just because you'll attract other honorable people, but also like as I've looked into each of the values, I found that they're great even for purely selfish reasons. Like honesty has made
Most of
me
them are.
yeah, honesty has made me interact with reality better. When I used to lie to myself and embellish stories and bullshit things, it meant that I couldn't admit my own flaws to myself, which meant I was blind to them. So I had all these blind spots, but being blind to them didn't mean that they weren't there. They were still hurting me. My weaknesses were hurting me. Now, for a lot of those weaknesses, I'm aware of them. At the very least, I can say, "Oh, I'm bad at this. I'm bad at this. I'm bad at this," and I can get better. But
Yeah.
it's very hard to get better at something if you don't know that it's there.
Right. Yeah. So,
Okay, so
yeah,
self-awareness. Yeah, interesting. And then yeah, let's get into dating a little bit because I'm curious about that. So I'm
sure.
27 years old. I've never been on a date. What advice do you have for me?
Um, honestly, like I think the hardest part is really just getting in the right setting
Mm,
because like I feel especially as you get older, like the settings where you're just like in like an environment where like that's what people are looking for will become like a little like it might be more infrequent.
Mm-hmm.
You're not like going to like maybe necessarily like as many like parties or stuff. I mean, you can go to as many events as you want to, um, but it might not happen as like organically
Mm-hmm.
necessarily. So I think maybe like the one thing is just like, of course, any like hobbies and stuff you have, making like an effort to like branch out into those in like a public way is like probably a good idea. So maybe like you like going outdoors, maybe you go like mountain climbing a lot. It's like, okay, it's gonna sound like really weird. I go to like Camelback Mountain, it's out here in Arizona
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. It's crazy how many people you'll meet doing it. And I like promise like you'll probably meet someone if you do it long enough. But more realistically, you can like go to like events, you can go to like concerts, raves, stuff like that. Like just like places where like it's kind of what people are looking for.
Mm.
So it's like, okay, this is like sort of I mean, it might not be the main reason, but it's like acceptable, if that makes sense.
Right.
Beyond that, just like confidence, even when you don't have confidence, it's just like kind of the most important thing, I think. Be willing to talk to people. The way I actually met my current girlfriend, who I have been with for the better part of 2 years, like about a year and a half, like a little bit over.
Mm.
Um, I met her because my friends invited me to go bowling, and she was like in sort of like the group. It was like her and like these like other girls or whatever, and like I just like walked and like talked to them, even though like my friends were not in that group. They were like somewhere else, like freaking bowling in like another lane actually. But
Mm.
it's like I just talked to them because it's like I wasn't even like you don't really go in expecting that. That's the other thing. Like, don't really have any like expectations per se, but just like actually like try to like talk to these people because like I don't know, maybe they're cool, maybe you can make friends. Like at the end of the day, like just do your best to be confident and like give it a shot. It doesn't have to turn to anything crazy, but maybe it will, and
Mm.
that's all it is. I think. I mean, there's really like a lot of like crazy tips, like people, and there is some crazy stuff you can do realistically that will work in certain situations. But I think, as like cliche as it is, I genuinely do believe that just being genuine and confident is all it really requires, and just like a little bit of luck in the right situation.
Yeah. So, and I do think that luck is something we make, right? Like if I try this 500 times,
Hey, can't fail,
right,
can't fail
at
500
that
times in a row.
right,
Easy, baby.
yeah,
Dice will fall. It'll land on the six eventually.
yeah.
So.
Have you heard of Scott Galloway, by the way?
No, not at all.
So he's the one I got some of those statistics from, and actually his
Okay.
advice to young people uh, was basically one of the big ones was create as many opportunities as possible to find the best life partner for you. And he said, so you just have to get used to, you know, starting up a conversation with the person in front of you at line at Starbucks, the person behind you in the line at
Agree.
Starbucks,
Agree.
right? Like,
Yes. Yes.
so he told the story of how he met his wife. Basically, it
Mm,
was now I think one of his children's middle name is Raleigh or Raleigh because they met at the Raleigh Hotel, which I think is in North Carolina, that city, right? Raleigh.
okay.
But yeah, so basically, he said that he was by the pool and he saw his future wife, and he told himself, "All right, before I leave, I'm gonna talk to her. You know, I'm gonna make sure I talk to her." Even though, of course, he was afraid. Um, and so he approached her in broad daylight, and she was there with another woman and another guy. So she wasn't alone. And he said to cold approach someone like that without the aid of alcohol is a real challenge. And he's right. You know, I've I've talked to people in public before, and I've noticed that there's a certain awkwardness you have to get over in the first like 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
They're initially like sizing you up. And I think what's going on is they're like,
Yeah.
is this a multi level marketer? Is this a scammer? What does he want? Who is he? Can I trust him, basically?
Yeah.
They're like, so yeah, anyway, so he did this, and yeah, he ended up marrying her. And that was his life partner, right? So it's true that I've spent most of my life sheltered. Like, for example, I stayed home to play League of Legends instead of going to prom in high school.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Yeah. I mean, dude, I wouldn't have been able to go thanks to COVID anyway. But yeah, it is what it is. It's how it goes. Online school. But at least I got done like a little sooner, so it's not all bad.
so that basically shows me what my mindset has been for most of my life, which is almost
Yeah.
like, let's avoid girls and women. And this is partly because I grew up in a boys only school in UAE. So like,
Oh, okay.
I never got used to being around girls. So I interviewed someone recently, Kamiz. I'll send you that
Mhm.
link when we're done here. But he's an
Okay.
interesting guy, and he told me that he grew up in a household of mostly women. So it was very normal for him to be around women. He's very comfortable. I have not been. So now I have to develop that comfort in my late 20s and then try to get used to it. And I'm slowly getting better, you know. So I told myself, for example, I would say hi to every person at my brother's birthday party about a month ago, and it was at a beach. And so I did say hi to everyone. And then at the end, when I was leaving, a person asked for my number, and then she messaged me, you know, on WhatsApp later. So I was like, okay,
Nice.
I'm just getting better at building social connections and at overcoming my social anxiety. So I just have to keep doing that, I think.
Yeah, it's really solid. And
And what advice do you have for me to cultivate confidence in the right way? Because of course I don't want to be overconfident, right? And I don't want to
so
be
I think
underconfident. Yeah.
yeah, I think like so a good way, at least like how I kind of did it is like it's kind of like a fun way, but once again, it is kind of based on environment a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I think like a big part of like why things like, going up and just like talking to strangers is kind of like hard to do
Mm-hmm.
is because like it's just like it's really just like it's like the sociological factor, I guess. It's just kind of expected that you're kind of not gonna like talk to a random stranger, like someone you don't know, unless like maybe once again you are like trying to get them to do something, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time, right? So it's like kind of odd to like talk to someone else, but like just doing things in general that are like sort of odd, but not necessarily bad,
Mm-hmm.
can definitely help to like sort of like desensitize you to that sort of feeling. And then once you're kind of like over that, like anything becomes like super simple. Like, okay, here's an example. So last year when I was in, or yeah, like, yeah, last year when I was in GCU, it was like the second semester, but for me, that was actually my fall semester. So around this time, like maybe 2 months from now, last year, um, I just stopped wearing shoes, like no shoes, no socks, anything,
Mm-hmm.
for like pretty much a month. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I would wear shoes, like, sometimes if, like, I just didn't feel like but most of the time I wouldn't wear shoes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's because, I have, like, a friend and he does, like, some weird stuff sometimes, but it's pretty cool, and he just stopped wearing it, and he was like, "Dude, it's kinda cool." I was like, "Your feet don't hurt?" He's like, "No, you get used to it super fast." And the funniest thing he said was, you get, like you gain an appreciation for the ground beneath your feet, and you literally do in the most actual sense, like, you have favorite types of ground to walk on.
Mm-hmm.
But like people will like stare at you. Like I would go out and like people would like like but like it's the most important thing is to not like be like discouraged by that or like think like, oh, people think I'm weird. Like because people do think you're weird. But it's to like kind of like embrace it. Like that's part of the fun. Like genuinely that's part of the fun. Like I remember the first time I went out and did it with them, like these two girls like was like they were like visibly just like staring at us when we were like going to get food. And it was like, dude, we're getting our first stare. So I'm like, yeah, it's if you can have fun with it, it makes it way easier. And then like eventually, like I said, I started doing it on my own. I would like go to class without like wearing shoes. It was crazy. And like, some people would like talk to me about it. And I actually like met people through that because they'd be like, why aren't you wearing shoes? And I'm like, I just kind of don't want. I'm just kind of something I'm doing. And then, it start conversation and it would go from there. So like also doing stuff like that can like indirectly lead to, different opportunities. But then like also it doesn't have to be as crazy as like going outside without wearing shoes and like stepping on a rusty nail and then dying. It
Mm-hmm.
can be like, you know, when you go to talk to someone, I think the goal, especially like a stranger, I think you kind of just want to be as um like fun as you can. I don't want to say like even charismatic per se because that gives off the wrong idea, but the idea is that you want to have fun with this person and you want them to have fun with you too. And so you want to establish pretty quickly that like, hey, like I'm not here to like try to gain anything from you. I don't want you to do anything. I'm just kind of trying to talk to you. How I do that sometimes is I'll be like, actually, when I was leaving Chicago, it was my last night in Chicago before I was leaving the next day, and I was like out riding my longboard. I actually broke my longboard this day too, because like it was like the first day I like fell off it for the first time in like a month, and it just went into the street, and a car ran over it. It was kind of tragic. So I was like,
Jeez.
dang, it's for the last day too. Like it just destroyed. I got a cool picture out of it though, so that's something, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, so I was riding around earlier in the night,
Mm-hmm.
and on my way back home, I had passed this lady, and I don't know why, but she just looked really interesting to me. She was just like sitting on like this like bridge, and so I like literally, and this makes it even weirder, right? I literally doubled back to go talk to her. So like she like saw me pass her, and she knew like I was just coming back like just to talk. That already instantly, it's like she's probably like, "What does this dude want?" As she sees me coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I'm like, I'm kind of like aware of that. It's like, okay, like this is kind of like weird. So let me like not stress her out. I'm like, hey, like I'm not trying to be weird or anything. Literally just say that. Like I'm not trying to be weird or anything. You can tell me I get lost if you want. But and like I forget what it was, but I think like something about her appearance was really cool. Like I think she was wearing some like cool clothes. I think she had like some cool earrings and stuff. I think that's part of why I was like, whoa, like she seems interesting. So I was like, I noticed like whatever, blah blah blah. Noticed this. I thought it was kind of cool. And then she's like, oh yeah, thanks, like whatever, whatever. And then like I started talking to her about like her experiences and stuff. And it was really interesting because go figure this. She was just coming back from Arizona. She had lived here for over a decade.
Wow.
Um, and she was going to Chicago the same day I was going, like the same night, right before I was going back to Arizona from Chicago. I was like, "There's no way." Guess where I'm going back to? And so we were talking about our different experiences and like why she's back in Chicago. And I would have like maybe kept it going longer, but I just honestly kind of wanted to like see like what was up with her. So it was just like a little quick conversation. But it's just stuff like that. Like even if it seems like a little awkward, you can literally just address that. Be like, "Hey, like." It is what it is, but I think you're cool. Like whatever, why ever, whatever the reason for talking to them is, whether like just act, even if like you just kind of wanted to, and you're like, just like find something like, oh, like this is cool, or I kind of like this, whatever. Just like something to like break the ice. Like this is why I'm talking to you, um, and then like it helps you get to that next stage of like actually having a conversation and not being like that weird like, who are you kind of like situation. So sorry, I kind of like rambled there a little bit,
No, I like listening to you. It was a good story.
but yeah.
Are you in Chicago right now?
No, no, I've been in Arizona for a few weeks now.
Okay.
Probably like 3 weeks now.
Okay. Because I am planning to visit Chicago in early October.
Well, there is a chance that I might be there. So if I am, maybe we could meet up. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, just message me on Discord. That's interesting because so basically I'll be traveling to the US for the first ever time in my life. Um,
Hmm.
in 4 days, actually. August 15th
Nice.
is the night that
Yeah.
I'll be flying out to Boston. And then
Austin.
Boston,
Okay.
yeah. I'll be staying with a friend from the podcast for about 11 days. And then I'll be in Florida for the bulk of my time with another friend from the podcast. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
met Marcus Ocularis. Probably not.
Maybe not.
Yeah, but
Maybe once, if anything. But yeah.
yeah. And then, yeah, from there, I have a friend who's living in Chicago. He wants me to visit him. He even said he'd pay for my flight ticket, which is very generous.
That's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll visit him. I'll stay with him and his wife. And then yeah, I'll explore Chicago a bit because I've heard it's a very interesting city.
It is. Yeah.
And there's some friends I have like around Illinois. And my goal is so the reason my friend lent me this camera is because I really want to do in-person interviews as much as I can now. Even if it takes a lot more effort, it's like worth it. So I bought a bunch of
Yeah.
equipment.
I agree.
I'm learning the skills. Yeah. Um, but the thing you said about that story that really sticks with me is you had the courage to go up to her and do this, and you gave a name. You basically addressed the elephant in the room, which is, hey, I'm not trying to be weird. And by doing that, so on one hand, yes, that brings up the weirdness to the other person if they weren't thinking about it. But either way, it kind of dissipates. It dismantles the power that has because now they're like, oh, at least he's self-aware.
Yeah, and it just like it really depends on the situation because like I said, it was very obvious that like I was literally swinging back around just to talk to her. So like it was like kind of very like I like it was pretty like obvious that it was weird. I don't think that's like a super normal thing that happens. So I was
Right.
like, okay, that's like kind of apparent. She's like literally looking at me as I'm coming up to her. I'm like, okay, like yeah, this is like a little awkward. So this is how we're gonna do it. But
Right.
also like if you're in like a situation where just like randomly talk, like obviously if you're in a club, like you're not gonna go up to a girl and be like, hey, like not to be weird, but like you know that might be a little different. So it just depends.
Hmm.
But yeah, just like don't be like afraid to just like address that or just like really it's just like I said, just try to like get to the actual conversation if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Just like establish that hey, like I'm an actual human being and I'm not gonna like do anything weird. Like, I'm not gonna try to scam you,
I
and
have
we
no
can
ill
actually
intentions. I just
pretty much,
I'm
yeah,
genuinely
yeah,
curious and want to connect with you. Yeah,
yeah, and
and
that's
learn
like
about you.
that's not a super common thing. So that's not like people's first thought when like a stranger comes up to them. So
They're
that's all
usually
you're
like,
trying to
"Oh,
get.
does he need the time? Is he lost?" Like they assume there's some
Yeah, yeah,
tangible problem
yeah.
that you're trying to
Something
solve.
is going on at
Right.
least. Yeah. So and you're just establishing nothing's really going on. I'm just trying to talk,
Right.
more or less.
Which is interesting because yeah, like curiosity drives me so much. Man, I was on the train and I heard these two girls talking to each other about like an ACL injury and how they were healing and some steps that one of them took with physical therapy to heal in like 3 weeks instead of like 5 months, and I was just thinking to myself, wow, they know so much about the human body. I wanted to ask like how did you learn this? Like where's this knowledge coming from? It's so interesting. But, I was afraid that I would come across as a creep. Uh
Yeah,
and I
dude,
always feel
it's
yeah,
no, no, sorry. Yeah, my bad.
no, it's
It's
fine.
just like there really are levels to it because like I feel like I've gotten to a point where I'm not like super like self-conscious and like I could sort of just will myself to do things.
Mm,
But then like I have, for example, my friend who kind of even got me to this point, and that guy's just like on another level. Like for me, it'll be like, oh yeah, I'll talk to someone in public. For him, like for example, he'll hear that conversation. Let's say he's like sitting at like the front of the bus or something.
yeah.
They're like at the back of the bus.
Yeah.
He'll be like, "Oh, that's interesting." Literally like walk to the back of the bus to go sit like closer to them and be like, "Yo, like were you guys talking like dude,
Yeah,
I don't think I would do that, but like why
yeah.
not?
I'd
Why
love to
not?"
learn to do that. I think I've done that
Yeah.
sometimes, but it's rare. It's yeah. It's
That
honestly
that is like a that is like another level of like you have to just like you just have to I don't know, dude. It's hard to do, but once you do it, it's never as bad as it seems like it's gonna be.
exactly. It's
Like
never as
it's
bad as
never
it
been.
seems. Yeah. And I think people respond positively to positive intentions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You're usually going to have like a solid experience. I think it's really like the first few times of doing like any given thing that's just like the hardest because like you have to force yourself to see that it's not going to be that bad. And
Yeah.
then once it goes okay, then you're like, okay, I can do that again.
Then it becomes self-perpetuating. Yeah.
Yeah. And like the thing is like if you do it once and it's like the worst thing in the world, like you don't it's like okay, maybe we don't do that again, but you know,
It's worth trying. It's
As
worth finding
yeah,
out.
as long as you're not doing something actually ridiculous, like it's usually worth the shot. I thought.
Where does your friend live, by the way? Maybe I could interview him sometime.
Dude, he would be a pretty interesting guy to interview. Maybe.
Yeah.
Um, he lives in. He's kind of like a wanderer. So he does go to the same school at GCU. So he's in Arizona for most of the school year.
Hmm.
He's actually back in Arizona now, I think.
Hmm.
But over the summer he was in Germany and like was it Texas he was in or somewhere in Texas? I
I'm
don't know.
ending my
Dude,
trip in Texas, near Austin
dude,
and San Antonio.
wait, when will that be?
That will be late October.
I can't say for sure right now, but so my family, who I'm staying with now, actually,
Hmm.
they should be. The plan is that by the time I would be going to school, actually, by the start of September, they're moving to San Antonio,
Oh,
like
wow.
Texas.
Wow.
How crazy is that, right?
Because I have
So
family that lives basically like close to San Antonio and then just a little bit southwest of Austin.
right. So if that is like a thing that ends up being finalized and they do move to San Antonio, then I would definitely be able to go out there and maybe we could like meet up for a day. That'd be kind of cool.
Get some Texan barbecue.
Yeah, right.
That's
Like
one of
that'd be
my
kind of
goals. Yeah, to try.
yeah. So you got to do that, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty
No, I'd love to do that. I'd love to do that. The other thing I'm really looking forward to is learning Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in Austin, Texas, because John Danaher has his gym there, and he's basically
cool. Oh,
the best coach in the history of the sport. So
that's it.
it's
Okay.
an amazing opportunity. Yeah. And I listened to some of his philosophy, and I was like, wow, if I train with this guy, my life will change. Not just my hobbies, but like my actual life philosophy will change in a good way.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah. Hopefully, right.
So, okay, just to close off, it's been a great conversation. There was a point you made that I want to unpack a little bit with you, which is about sort of leaning into being weird in a good way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what is weirdness? Weirdness is just abnormality, being an outlier,
Yeah.
doing things in a different, non standard way.
Yeah.
And I've realized that I've always been weird, but I'm becoming more and more comfortable with my weirdness rather than hiding from it, being ashamed of it, being afraid of it. And I've also noticed that as we grow older, so early on in life, I think weirdness leads to us being bullied or being an outcast or being looked at strangely and so on. Later on in life, like early adulthood and later, I think that people actually start to respect when you are strange or quirky or eccentric, but you're stable in who you are. You're not insecure, right? You're now
I agree.
confident that this way you figured out of living life works for you and you're happy with it. So it doesn't really matter what other people think of you. And ironically, when you don't care what other people think, they tend to respect you more when they can sense that, when they sense the self assuredness. Because I think a lot of people, they lack the self assuredness, and so they want to be around you and bask in it and hopefully learn from it, right? Because it is contagious to some degree. Like when I spend time
Right.
around people who are self confident, I do grow more self confident, especially when they aren't trying to tear me down, which they usually aren't. Like usually self
Yeah.
confident people don't need to put
That's
others
the thing.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah, to feel good about themselves. So, my question in all of that is how can young men discover and cultivate this for themselves earlier in life, even maybe in their teenage years? Because I've noticed some people have figured that out. Your friend might be
Yeah.
one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so a little bit.
Mm,
I think I'm like a little bit there, but I think that that's like the difficult part is that honestly like so that was like the case for me quite a bit in like elementary and middle school especially. I noticed that like um I felt like especially towards middle school, the more like myself I was, it wasn't that like I would get bullied or anything, but like it just like I wouldn't like really feel like I really like fit in or whatever, stuff like that. And so it would be like, okay, I'll just like act this way instead. And it's
mhm,
like, oh, cool. Now like I'm friends with everyone. Sick. That's nice, I guess. And then high school was like I think high school is like a bit of a turning point for me because high school is like more of the same and like I just like didn't really care anymore to be honest. So
mhm,
I think I just started like reverting back to like how I actually was, which I'm kind of happy for.
mhm,
Um and I think that like it kind of sucks to say, but realistically, I think for the people who are not in the position where they can find like other people who will like sort of accept them for who they are,
mhm,
to a certain extent, you might just have to not even like not care, but sort of just like be willing to, stick to like what you feel and what you like know is correct for you and like what works for you,
mhm,
regardless of the fact that maybe it won't bring you like as many friends or stuff like that in the short term. Because I think that that'll set you up better like in life in general, obviously, but then even like in the not so long term, like even for me, just being in college, like I think people start to value that like way higher instantly.
mhm,
And so it's like just like don't really sacrifice on who you are. You don't even have to like fully just like commit to like this idea of like being you,
mhm,
as like bad as that might sound. You can like sort of like conformity is a bad thing, and I would never really say that you should conform, but you can sort of like act like your friends a bit, you know what I mean? You can like be like a normal person to
mhm,
like some extent. Then and that's okay. But just don't like completely don't become something that you aren't, I suppose.
mhm,
That this is all very common sense like um sort of information, but I think unfortunately regardless of how common it is, it you know, it's a little harder to do in practice because it's like people want to be liked, people want to have like friends and stuff, but it's like at some point your individuality and like your personality do mean more
mhm,
and people will see that. And I think that's once again like when I stopped caring in high school, it was just because it wasn't because like once again like it was I hated like what I was every day or anything, but it's just like this isn't really like I don't really see the point in doing this sort of stuff
mhm,
when I could just like be who I am and it's like whatever. People don't like me as much, it is what it is. And then I went to college and I found a bunch of people who like did like me for like who I am. And
yeah,
that's really sick. And that's like a great feeling, right? But if you can't find that until you get to a certain point, it can be hard to like hold out until then.
mhm,
So I mean, it's definitely like a challenge. I guess you kind of just have to like it's kind of like a light at the end of the tunnel sort of thing, unfortunately.
mhm,
But it's definitely doable. I think like the less you care, the easier it is. And so like it really starts way earlier than like even, high school or middle school. It
Mm,
really starts with, I think, probably a lot of people's parents and stuff like that,
right.
sort of like instilling these ideas where it's like, if you can not care so much about like your surroundings and like what, your peers are doing in whatever environment you are, you know, when you're like younger, then you're not going to care as you get older. And I think that's how you really gain a strong sense of self and carry that into adulthood as well. But if you're already at the point where it's like, okay, crap, well, I didn't get that, so what do I do? It's
Mm,
just like that's where unfortunately, like the sort of like I don't want to say discipline, but it does come down to like what you can do. So you really just have to focus on like, and it's one of those things again where you have to think about why you're doing the things you're doing. If you want to like just, you don't really want to behave in certain ways and you kind of just want to be more of who you actually are, then when you do stuff that doesn't really align with like what you actually want to be, you have to think to yourself like, why did I just do that? And as you start to like come to the same conclusions time after time, you're like, okay, I see what the problem is, can I fix it? And you can always fix it, but it's really like, am I willing to fix it right now?
there's something, man. You just brought up a whole bunch of interesting points now.
Yeah, sorry.
Parenting has been one of the topics I've been really interested in. And by the way, you don't need to apologize. I think it's a good thing ultimately,
Okay,
because
cool, cool,
that's
cool.
what
Yeah.
we're here for, right? Like I love this.
Yeah, I suppose,
This
right?
is what I live for. This is why I'm alive. Um, so with yeah, parenting, maybe let's just dive into that a little bit and then close off the conversation because that's a topic I
Okay,
love
sure.
thinking about,
Yeah.
learning about, talking about, reading about, even though I'm not a parent. And actually, for the first few years of me learning about parenting, I didn't even plan to be a parent. I just thought, well, no one is parenting me now. I'm parenting myself, so I better learn some better ways to treat myself and teach myself.
That's a pretty good way of thinking about it.
Yeah. So, one key thing you mentioned is like, okay, what if parents raise a child to have a strong sense of self so that they're not seeking their parents' approval and then they're not going out into the world seeking the approval of their peers and their teachers and so on? What if they can appreciate the approval? They can appreciate it when it comes, but they also don't feel lacking when it isn't there. Because I do think that a lot of successful people have to learn to go their own way and they have to learn to kind of be lonely in a sense, right? To be willing to be in solitude and to sort of be in the dark. So if you imagine that being in the light is sort of you're basking in the glow of fame, approval, status, acceptance, attention, whatever it might be. And then to be in the dark is to sort of be sitting there every morning writing your book or working on something or practicing your League
Yeah,
of Legends,
right.
whatever it is, and to mostly be doing that alone and to be feeling a sense of, oh, nobody sees the work I'm putting in, but I see it. So how can we parent in such a way that kids grow up first learning to belong to themselves? This is something Brene Brown has talked about that I thought was great, is learning to belong to yourself first so that you don't need to change who you are to derive that belongingness from other people. Because once you belong to yourself, you're stable in yourself, you are playing a long game, and people will find you, and you will find people who don't change you, but who really like you for who you are.
Yeah. Um, well, I mean, as far as like that question goes, like honestly, I don't really have the answer to that.
Mm,
It's like, um, I think parenting in general is something that I haven't like indexed too much into because I guess maybe it's just one of those things that I see as being so far off that's like I can, learn as much as is practical about it while not necessarily focusing on it right now.
mm,
But I do think that one thing that's kind of important that is like sort of in this at least general like area, like on this sort of topic, is that I think it's kind of important to um I guess it's like the importance of like allowing your children to actually like make choices
mhm,
and like not just choices in regards to like really simple things, but like actually like everyday life, like I mean, I I'll put it this way: if I had a kid, um, whenever that'll be, they'll probably have um an unusual amount of freedom,
mm,
but also responsibility. I
mm,
think that giving like feedback based on their performance or based on like the choices they make is really important, right? So that you can steer them into the generally like right direction, but also you don't want to steer them into like just like your direction, if that makes sense.
mhm,
So I think like this can also like help with like sort of developing this like sense of self because you're even like at home allowing them to like yeah, develop their own like thought patterns and like sort of like figure out like, how to do things and why they're doing things in like certain ways.
Hmm.
Um so I think like that's at least part of it. Probably not like the full answer, definitely, but maybe a piece of the puzzle.
That makes sense to me. Yeah. So, like, giving them freedom and responsibility because the two go hand in hand. And so, two final questions for you. One is,
Mhm,
what are the good things you think your parents have done for you? And what are the
mhm.
not good things? And then also, how would you define healthy masculinity?
Okay. So for the first one, I think the best things my parents did for me were I mean, honestly, like, so the emphasis on like education early on was like a big thing. I mentioned that earlier. And then even with, I used to freaking like hate reading, but my dad kind of, as well as like my second grade teacher specifically, which is kind of like a funny story, but for another time.
Hmm.
But really helped me like get into reading a lot more. I love reading so much to this day, and it's probably like a direct result of that. So I think that, and also I think my dad gave me like a lot of really solid values as well.
Hmm.
So mostly those things. Things I could have done better. Honestly, number one thing is just like actually like prepare me for the world. I feel like these guys didn't really teach me anything about like the process of like actually going to school, like taxes, like loans and stuff, like credit, really like all that stuff. Like, I mean, I'm getting it now, right? But like I kind of had to figure it out on my own.
Mm.
And I think that a lot of that is stuff that, like your parents can like realistically just teach you about to help you be like a lot more prepared for it when it comes.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that would be my like two things. And then healthy masculinity really just comes like um, it's like I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it. It feels like whether it's like positive or like toxic, I feel like just masculinity has become such like a buzzword almost.
Hmm.
But I would say that it's just really being like completely comfortable in who you are and being able to like express that how you want, right?
Hmm.
And I think that comes in like a lot of ways. I think that looks like, the freaking like 6'5", like Canadian lumberjack going out to chop his wood. And I think it's also like, like for example, me like, okay, I think it's not like crazy to like wear. It's actually you can't really see it too well. I have like a full pink fit on right now. I
Hmm.
don't think that's like the craziest thing, but like I especially throughout like the past year, I've like dyed my hair like purple and stuff. I've had like you know, like I've painted like my fingernails different colors from like red, blue, like whatever.
Hmm.
And it's like I think that that's totally fine. I think both of those things are like totally cool, and it's just like you find like the people who like you for it, and I think as long as you're like really comfortable in what you are and like who you are and what you're doing, then that's like pretty positive masculinity. That could go for women too, of course, but I think that I would define like use that to define positive masculinity because I think that's um something that's like kind of hard to do as a guy. I think that both like the more stereotypical like big burly dudes are having like a rough time right now because everyone just freaking hates them.
Mm.
Um, like yeah, like being a man, like it's like the stereotype. That's like the idea of like toxic masculinity. These like big guys. It's like and it's like most of them are nice dudes. Like they didn't do anything wrong. And on the other hand, it's like also like if you like paint your fingernails or something that's like you're gay or whatever. And it's like so everyone is like facing like it's like everyone will have like critics, and it's like it's gonna be a little hard to like just be like comfortable in who you are regardless.
Mm.
But if you can do that, then I think that that's like definitely a very positive brand of masculinity for sure.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I think that's a great place to end, great note to end on. Thank you, Josiah. It
Yeah,
was great having you on.
for sure. Yeah, it's great talking to you again. It always is.